day, and welcome to the latest Transport Weekly Wrap. I'm Bev Govender, and as usual, we'll start off with some macroeconomic, general market news, and then end with a tech/AI segment. So, in our macro stories of this week, we're going to cover two basic things. The first thing is the election wrap and what's the latest in the US, and the second thing we're going to talk about is inflation and interest rates, particularly in the US as well. In our AI segment, I want to discuss the concept of the AI bubble, or whether or not we have a bubble. And the reason I'm talking about this is that there's been a couple of reports from some investment banks in the last couple of weeks that are giving some kind of, indications that they don't really see how AI is justifiable in terms of the revenues created versus the valuation that currently is being priced into the market. Okay, starting off with the election news. Okay, so we've had the closing of the elections in the UK where, Labour won, but surprisingly, Labour won with less votes than they lost in the last two times. What do I mean by that? I mean, the number of votes of people that voted for Labour this time around, when they have the biggest majority that they've ever had, basically, in the last 100 years or so, was less than they got in the last couple of elections when they lost very badly to the Conservatives, indicating that it wasn't so much that Labour won, it was that the Conservatives lost. Okay? The second thing is that Nigel Farage came through, and like we said, got between 3 and 4 seats, despite getting quite a huge chunk of the percentage of votes cast. Now, I'm going to talk about the French election now, and I'm going to come back to the UK election and discuss what the danger and the possibilities around this mean going forward. We've had the second round of the French election also go through, and here the party that got the most votes, which was the far-right party, both in the first and the second round, actually ended up with the third most seats. So the other two parties who got less votes got more seats. Why? Because the French system is designed to exclude extremists. The way it works is this. You have the first round. In the first round, unless you win a majority in a particular seat, you don't get to basically just get the seat. You have to basically do a second round where any smaller parties, like taking a small amount of votes, are kicked out, and only the biggest parties go against each other. And so you know that people are actually going to have to vote for what they think is the best of the available options, not just whatever the options are out there. What this really means is that any extremist party that the majority don't like doesn't get through just because they got like 30% of the vote, because the opposition vote was split between multiple different people. There's a second round to make sure that if you are winning, you have at least the majority support. Okay, not that you're so disliked that the majority will coalesce against you and prevent you from winning. And that is what's happened with the far right party, Marine Le Pen's party. That yes, she gets the most votes, mid-30s, but the other guys got in the 20s. But the people that didn't vote for her really don't like her. Really don't like her party. Sorry, not don't like her, but don't like her party. That means that in jurisdictions where she was first and the other two parties together below her combined had more votes, what happened was those parties got to agreement, and the one that had the better chance of winning carried on, and the one that didn't dropped out. And there was many cases of this agreements between the center party and the left-wing party, where they decided that this party is going to win, the other party drops out. Even though they were rivals, they would rather have the leftists rather the central win versus the right, and the center rather the left win rather than the right. By doing that, they made sure that both those parties got more votes then, or rather more seats than the right-wing party, which technically had the most votes among all parties. Now, why is this important? The French system works really well to prevent extremism. The UK system works really well to prevent, it's called big switches around, okay? Because generally what happens when you have first past the post, people don't want to waste their votes in places where, there's a lot of, where your party may have a bit of support, but not enough to get above that first past the post thing. So they'd rather, for instance, you get the Conservatives and the Labour Party voting or reasonably close to each other. But you want to support Reform, which is like the more right-wing party. You wouldn't vote for Reform. You'd either vote for the Conservatives because, yes, the Conservatives are not, you're the party you really like, but they're the one that gets you closest to Labour and therefore might be the one that wins. So the seat could go to your party or the people that you don't like as much, but more closer to what you want than the party you really like. For instance, in South Africa, we had the MK get a lot of votes with a proportionate representation system. That basically would have worked well for them in this particular system. But if you had, for instance, a system like the UK has, the MK vote would not have been as big in other parts of the place besides KZN, because people realized that they would not have gotten any kind of benefit from voting for the MK versus vote for the ANC or vote for the DA, whatever it may be, in those particular jurisdictions. So it had a different outcome because of the underlying mechanics of the vote. Okay, so looking at the UK, what the danger there is this: Reform was second in a lot of places, okay, to Labour, which means that next election they can go reasonably to those people that basically didn't vote for Reform and say, hey, we are not the party that's basically spoiling for the Conservatives. The Conservatives are the party that's spoiling for us. If you are conservative or maybe more right-wing like us, you'd rather vote for us than vote for the Conservatives because we have the best chance of beating Labour. And this is the kind of thing that can really change very quickly in a place like the UK, because the perception of your ability to win overall changes whether or not you can win, because people won't feel like they're wasting their votes to vote for you, versus in the French system, where there's going to be a second round coming through, and then you can really negotiate a more centrist kind of position. In the UK, if a very extreme party has a chance of winning, the chance of them actually winning goes up. In France, if they have a chance of winning, the chance of them winning goes down unless they're already of the majority, because everybody else will coalesce against them and form like a united front against them. So that's the French and UK election. And now moving on to the US election. So Biden's debate was a disaster by any kind of definition of a disaster. Since that debate, initially for the first couple of days, there was a lot of calls for him to basically step down. Then he seemed to consolidate things, and people thought that he was definitely going to be able to hold out. And over the last couple of days, we've seen some major Democratic donors, people like Disney Harris, like George Clooney, the actor, like Rob Reiner, the film director, come out and say, no, we must be replaced. Now, there's the thing. The way the system works in the US, again, the mechanics is important. You can't replace Biden at the current point in time unless he decides to leave. Unless he decides to leave, or they do what's called a call that says he's incompetent in his current position. Then you basically replace him as president right now. Not when his term expires, replace him as president right now. Those are the options. If he does not want to go, you can't force him to go unless you go and basically have him replaced as president right now and say that he is incapable of fulfilling the job. Okay, so that is the Democrats' the dilemma. Do they want to have Biden weakened if he is going to be the nominee against Trump by saying he should be replaced? Or do they want to basically have almost a certainty of losing against Trump by having Biden there versus trying for somebody else, like a Newsom or a Whitmore or a Kamala Harris? Right now, it seems to be that there's lots of calls coming through and people are taking the risk of saying, we want to basically take Biden out, even though if we can't, he's going to be weaker against Trump in the election, because we don't think he's going to win anyway against Trump. So there's no danger of weakening him because he's going to lose anyway. So the better option is to try and take him out, try and get him replaced. This is going to be decided the next couple of weeks. This can't go on, indefinitely. Why? Because you can't just turn up at a conference, the Democratic National Conference, and have a debate on who's going to be president or the presidential candidate without some preparation in advance. And that happens next month. Okay, so Biden has to basically decide the next couple of weeks whether or not he's going to be there or not. If he says no, I'm going to stick around, then the Democratic Party has to decide whether they really don't want him in there, and then have him removed as president currently, which they can do because they can basically say he's incapable of doing the job of president right now, which I'm pretty sure he is. I don't think he would pass a psychometric test or a capacity test for his intelligence right now, or his ability to basically do certain things at the current point in time. He would not pass a dementia test. And that would mean taking him out right now, having Kamala Harris become president right now, and then maybe have Kamala Harris be the nominee, or have an open nomination process, like a mini kind of primary process to determine who the nominee is actually going to be for the person that faces Trump in November. Okay. And then moving on to interest rates. We had CPI numbers coming in from the US, slightly lower than expected, showing a definite trend downwards, still 3% year on year, but expected 3.1. We are seeing jobs numbers in the US also being weaker. So the weaker economy and weaker inflation increases the chance of a rate cut come September. So I think the chance of rate cut in September is pretty high at the moment. What does this mean? Well, the US starting to cut in September. If you looked at the start of the year, this was not that aggressive. But if you looked at a couple of months ago, the chance of a rate cut was one cut for the year. If they cut in September, this chance goes to maybe two cuts for a year, which would be positive for the market, would be positive for especially growth stocks. And I think that we could be seeing also a bit of positivity for emerging market currencies like the rand. The rand could strengthen. We've already seen the rand go up a little bit on this news of the inflation number being a little lower than expected. I think if we see more consolidation of a cut in December coming through as the default position, I think that we will see the rand strengthen, especially if we can see some more stability in the GNU. I don't think the GNU is going to last for 5 years, but just needs to basically last a few more months or the last year or so for the market to be reasonably comfortable with stability. And if we can see load shedding be held off a little longer. Fingers crossed, load shedding has been off for over 100 days now. And, yes, normally in wintertime, it is a bit better than it is normally. But I think the performance of Eskom with the new head of Eskom right now has been significantly better than people had been fearing. It could really be that Andre de Ruyter was doing maybe too many things around renewable energy and so on, and wasn't really burning coal as hard as he should be and so on, that maybe it's possible that we are in a situation where when load shedding does return, which is likely to do in the second half of the year, we won't be level 4s and 6s, it'll be 1s and 2s, which I think is still pretty good in the current environment. And then we could see the rand strengthen further from here. Okay, so like I said, strong chance of a rate cut coming through for the US in September, probably going to follow through with us. Thereafter, we'll follow the US's lead. And I think that also reasonably good for the currency, good for stocks as well, if this is true. Now, moving on to AI. So, recent report out stating that the current valuations for companies like NVIDIA and some of the AI companies out there, like OpenAI, etc., is probably a bit high considering what the impact AI is going to have on the global economy. Now, to understand what they are meaning by this, the idea is that AI needs to generate tens of trillions of dollars of value to justify the valuations we have right now. For instance, just on terms of the expenditures for like a company like Microsoft. For Microsoft to basically spend the kind of $200 billion that it has to get from AI, it has to make about $500 billion from AI in the near future to justify this kind of expenditure. That is the kind of numbers we're talking about here, because these companies have gotten so ridiculously expensive, like an NVIDIA, over $3 trillion. That translates to the economy having to grow, a couple percent higher per year for the next decade to justify NVIDIA being as expensive as it is. Because if we don't have that couple percentage improvement in GDP per year, okay, starting reasonably soon and carrying on for the next several years, NVIDIA's valuation can't be justified in the market. $3 trillion, to understand that, is a significant chunk of the total value of global GDP. The global GDP number is about $90 billion, just under $90 billion. $3 trillion, $90 trillion, sorry. So the global GDP is about $90 trillion. $3 trillion is about just about 3% of global GDP. You know what I mean? And if you're going to have a company like NVIDIA at $3 trillion, and you're going to have a company like, Microsoft going up like $1 trillion probably in the AI news. You're going to have Apple and Amazon and all these other companies going up in the equivalent of altogether maybe $4 or $5 trillion in total based on AI. Well, that's a significant chunk of total global GDP, like 6% of global GDP. You can't have, and if global GDP went up by 6%, that wouldn't immediately translate to that value of 6% of global GDP being valued in those companies. Global GDP has got by more than 6% for you to translate the valuation of, say, $5 or $6 trillion that we have right now for these companies. What I mean by that is that these companies have to add more than, say, 6 trillion of value to be worth 6 trillion. You don't get the total value add to the world. You get a portion of that. So what is $6 trillion? It's 6, 7, like who knows what kind of percentage. And then to justify that valuation for the companies, you can't be just doing 6 trillion. You could be doing multiples of 6 trillion, maybe 20 trillion. And what does that translate to? That translates to basically a quarter of global GDP. So AI has to add maybe a quarter or maybe more to global GDP over the next decade. What does that translate through in terms of global growth rates per year? That's a couple percentage points at least per year going on for 10 years. You see what I mean? For the current valuation of these AI companies to be valid, they've got to add more than their valuations to global GDP over the foreseeable future. Because they are worth multiple trillions, they've got to add multiple trillions times a certain factor to global GDP over the foreseeable future. And that translates to a few percentage points increase per year in global GDP over the next decade or so. Now, the question is, are you going to get that from LLMs and things that draw you pictures? No. We are not anywhere near the technology currently that is going to give you a couple percentage points better global GDP performance, continuously for the next decade. That's not where we are. So what does that mean? Does it mean AI is overvalued? No, not necessarily. What is the thing that would make AI overvalued or not? It's whether the next version of AI will be able to add productivity that's going to increase global GDP by a couple percentage points a year. LLMs, generative models are good. They will give you something. I mean, they will add to the graphic design, they will add to video production, they will add to, marketing, writing, and whatever, copywriting. But at best, that's a few 100 billion in terms of added value over the next decade or so. Not 20, 30, 40 trillion in added value over the next decade or so. It's totally a different kind of scale. We're talking much, much different in terms of price differentials, more than an order of magnitude difference. We have to see the next models do things that the current models can't do. And that thing that they do has to basically add to global GDP by, like I said, a couple percentage points to get the current valuations being justified. The question is, will that happen? That comes down to what's called scaling. Whether or not, if you add more inputs, we're going to see the same kind of improvements in production, in outputs that we saw from GPT-3 to GPT-4, or from GPT-2 to GPT-3. Good news is that right now it does appear that the people that have seen GPT-5, that would be the person like the CTO of Microsoft, Chief Technology Officer, people like Sam Altman, they seem to be very confident to state, yes, this stuff is significantly better. Now, a couple of things to note here. What have they seen? So the way you train an AI right now is you train it and get this kind of the model out that's very strong but very wild. It basically will say slurs. It will give you the ability, the formation of a bomb, all the things you want it to do. Then you've got to take it and train it in a different way to basically make it nice and acceptable to be in public, effectively. They have trained the raw product, so they should by now know the capacity. It will say bad things, it'll do bad things, but the raw, horsepower behind it, they know it by now. And unless the CTO of Microsoft is lying for whatever reason, because he's going to be caught out in a couple of months' time, unless Sam Altman is lying, because again, he shouldn't be lying because he'll be caught out in a couple of months' time because these things are going to be released in a couple of months' time. It appears pretty clear that the next model coming out, the next generation of models, like the GPT-5 and comparable models, are significantly better and have not yet shown what's called plateauing, where you add more product in, or more data, more computing power in, and you don't get a significantly better product out. Right now, it does seem to be scaling, where you add more computing power, more data in, still gives you a significantly better product. Whether or not the jump is going to be as much as from 3 to 4, not sure. But even if it's like a third or half as big as the jump from 3 to 4, if 5 is as much better than 4 as 3 was, it's game over. It's great. If it's only half or a third better, it still justifies current valuations. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.